Okay, greetings to one and all. Today is the 4th of January 2026. It's 11:25. And I'm not going to do a full introduction, but this is Chad Milam, 082-859-2684. I'm one of the directors of Disaster Relief CERT being the Community Emergency Response Teams. And just to provide a disclaimer, that we are looking into why we've been requested to change our name. And we will see how that pans out in the course of this year. One has to consider all the legalities first and foremost before one can just do that. That being said, the purpose of this particular discussion, I did bring members together in the month of November 2025, group members from various entities, whether they be CPFs, block watchers, neighborhood watchers, and any other interested parties, to discuss whether first aiders should be considered first responders. So those with level 1, 2, or 3 in first aid, or as it is now known, basic, intermediate, and advanced first aid, for first responders, believe it or not, whether they should be given or fall into the category of first responders. And then in the last week, basically, or the beginning of January 2026, another conversation was launched, and that was to discuss the legalities of flying drones, especially within the suburban areas. Now, what I plan on doing with these voice notes, just as voice note number 1, we will call it the legalities of drones series, or the legalities of flying drones series. And I'm going to incorporate the first aiders as a first responder as part of the exact same conversation, because in essence, these two go hand in hand with each other on the principle of what people, entities, and other bodies are in actual fact doing. And I think there's a lot of overlap in terms of the concept. So we're going to discuss both of them at the same time. For each of the voice notes, I will try and keep them under 5 minutes. This way, people can listen to the voice note, as I said, more or less like a podcast. And then when I've completed, my discussion, and I tend to talk from the heart. However, there will be some legislation that I'm going to bring in, and in some cases, I might not even specifically cover the legislation, but just refer to the relevant act, because I'd like to encourage group members to actually go and read the act that has been brought into question, or which might be applicable to the discussion, in order to read it for themselves. One of the biggest issues that we have when we start looking at the legalities of what we are doing within social media is that people are just taking it for granted, that which they are told or they hear or they read, in terms of messages being posted. And, there's normally no reference or groundwork that's been done in order to substantiate the info that has been put out there. So there will be times that I'm going to specifically stipulate, go and have a look at this act. I may or I may not, in actual fact, give you a section number or a regulation number if it is from the regs or the regulations, in order for you, the listener, you can actually go and check it out for yourself. Now, once I've got a couple of these voice notes together, I will then, of course, share them out to the group. And at the conclusion of the discussion, at some point, I will consolidate all of them and then publish them to our YouTube channel. So let's have a look and see what we can do as we progress through the discussion. And I encourage all those that do listen to please participate in any questions, supply any information which may very well be required. Thanks all. Have a good one. This is voice note number 2 on the legalities of flying drones, plus a brief discussion on first aiders as first responders. Now, I did raise this question, as I mentioned in November, on several groups, and there's been a mixed and varied response from various entities throughout the entire discussion. And just recently, one of the posts that was put out into circulation actually says that, yes, many organizations do, in actual fact, encourage their members to go through the level 1 and 2 and 3 first aid certifications. And the very first thing that I want to point out is that word that I just used called certification. And I know there's a lot of controversy regarding whether or not it is or whether it is or is not a qualification. And I think what we need to do is we need to understand how the actual, or what processes and what levels of education there are within the structure of SAQA, or the South African Qualification Association, and QCTO now that has been introduced as well, and then what was happening within the CETAs and all the rest of it. And the first thing I think everybody needs to understand is that qualifications inevitably refer to qualifications or training, the competency attained from training received through tertiary institutions like universities, or in some instances, certain colleges that are on the higher education level. So, for example, the ECPs that are coming out now, that is a qualification. Then, of course, when you've got your ILS and ALS and above, those are considered to be qualifications. And normally, it's the same as like within probably the accounting aspects as well, having completed a BCom or whatever the case might be, then those professionals, in actual fact, get registered with an authority that will oversee the activities of that particular field of expertise. So the Health Professional Council of South Africa will oversee everything to do with the medical aspects. That includes your doctors, your dentists, all your healthcare practitioners, and of course your BA and ALS and above, your paramedical personnel, all need to be registered with the Health Professional Council of South Africa. And this is actually, in the case of the medical side, this is in actual fact regulated by the National Health Act itself. It is a requirement of the Health Act that these professionals are in actual fact registered, and they then are provided with regulations as to what they can and cannot do. And there's a scope of practice, as it is generally called and known, because that is completely regulated. Now, the next level down in terms of the colleges, I did say that in some instances there are colleges, because the higher education level might refer to themselves or have named themselves as a training college, because they are not at a university level. They could in actual fact also provide these qualifications, at which point all the NQF levels are provided, the CPD points are provided within the overall requirement of the South African Qualification Authority, SAQA. Now, that there again, SAQA is ultimately the purpose of SAQA was to ensure that there is one standard level of training that is provided at each and every single one of the possibilities that may be presented to members of the general public, and in order to allow for the specifically in terms of the RPL, or the recognition of prior learning. So this is why we've got that overall governing body called the RPL, and they will in actual fact oversee everything that has been done from a qualification standard. But please don't be deceived by the name of qualification in SAQA, because they also oversee all of the diplomas that are issued. Now, diplomas are a totally different thing, and these are usually based on the number of hours of training that a person is provided, and the hours that a particular course or short courses, as some of them are known, are presented over X amount of hours. So your varsity degrees are several years, a couple of 100 hours in total, whereas when you come down to your diplomas, then your diplomas could be and are at very lower number of hours that are required. And I'm not talking about having to undertake X amount of practical hours, but I'm talking specifically of the hours in theory that are presented. And then from the next level down will be your certificates or your certifications. And of course, certifications are also still considered in most, or are considered in all cases, to be short courses with a specific need or addressing a specific need. Now, in closing, I've exceeded the 5 minutes on this voice note, but in closing, when you look at certifications, there's different manners or different ways and a different manner in which certificates can be issued. So a person who is a registered training provider in terms of SAQA, QCTO, etc., they are entitled to issue a certificate of competency, which will stipulate that that person is competent in terms of whatever training that they've undertaken. Then if you've got organizations that are not registered in terms of any regulation or requirement as a training facility or training provider for that particular subject, the certificate of completion could be issued just for a bit. Well, that is one of the levels there. So you can, in actual fact, register a person on a course, put them through 4, 5, 6, 8 hours on a course, or whatever the case might be. And of course, you can issue a certificate of completion just to indicate that that person did, in actual fact, complete the course. So to give you a simple analogy between the two, level 1, level 2, and level 3 first aiders, the instructors and the institutions providing such training have to be registered in terms of QCTO or the various CETAs as training providers and training facilities, and of course have to have moderators and all the rest of it. They can, in actual fact, issue a certificate of competence for level 1, 2, and 3. But let's take Stop the Bleed, for example. Stop the Bleed isn't regulated in terms of South Africa, even though it is an internationally recognized program. And this is a very key important point. It is a program. So those people who, in actual fact, provide Stop the Bleed training in terms of the Stop the Bleed program, the international program, they, in actual fact, can provide a certificate of completion just to stipulate that that person has, in actual fact, attended the course. And I mean, the majority of Stop the Bleed training is over a 4-hour period. So you can see the difference between 4 hours on Stop the Bleed and maybe 12 hours on level 1 plus an additional 12 or 16 hours on level 2, even though some people do combine all three of the courses over maybe 16 or 20 odd hours. That the difference between the hours of training is rather large in number. So please, let's just understand that we've got these different levels to start off with, and because I'm 10 minutes in, we will move on to voice note number 3. Voice note number 3, I ended on the first aid definition, as well as the paramedic definition in terms of the National Health Act, and continuing now with voice note number 4 on the legalities of flying drones plus first aiders as first responders. I wanted to throw in a caveat in terms of terminology and definitions. But before I do that, I need to just bring bring a particular section of the National Health Act to the listeners' attention with regards to first aiders as written within the Act itself. Now, within the Act, when we have a look at the provision of emergency medical services at event, in other words, the National Health Act actually does provide guidance and a framework and a requirement as to how events are in actual fact to be managed. So this is now Section 6, which stipulates the following provisions apply. And I'm not going to read through all of them. There's a fair number of provisions in terms of Section 6. So, for example, 6.1 or Section 6, subsection 1, a risk assessment must be undertaken for every event. The risk assessment must be based under subsection 2 on the type of event, the number of spectators, etc., as listed in Annexure B, which sets out the method of calculating the minimum number, and Annexure C, which sets out the levels of resources required for the management of the event. So the National Health Act is looking specifically at the management of an event. Now, I'm going to encourage every listener, every first aider, every paramedic, every person, interested party, to go and read Section 6, subsection 12, because it says under the category of BAAs. Now, remember that this section actually refers to Annexures B and Annexures C, which then define the number of BAAs that are required and who are not part of the ambulance crews. But those two annexures also provide the number of ambulances that are required, ALS, BAAs, ECPs, doctors, etc., at a particular event. But subsection 12 of Section 6 says, under the category of BAAs that are not part of the ambulance crews, it is acceptable to utilize, take note, volunteer qualified level 3 first aiders at a maximum of 75% of the predicted number of BAAs. And this is an important paragraph or subsection of the National Health Act with regards to event management. And I'd like to discuss what is an event in terms of what we are looking at on this particular section of the National Health Act. But that being said, I said there is a caveat here. And if you read through the National Health Act correctly, there is another definition called medical personnel. And it is actually interesting to note the definition of medical personnel. It means a medical practitioner, registered primary healthcare nurse, emergency care personnel, or first aider. And this is now probably one of the areas where a lot of confusion actually comes in. You see, what they have done, when we look at medical personnel within the Act itself, the following should be noted. Number one, the definition in terms of the National Health Act does include first aider. The question that one needs to ask, is a first aider then considered as medical personnel? And the answer, I think, can be found in Section 4, subsection 12. And Section 4 says, the event medical service provider must ensure that medical waste is disposed of by medical personnel in accordance with existing legislation. I want to stop at this point and I want to move on to the next voice note, which will be voice note number 5, to discuss this caveat and this definition of medical personnel in a little bit more detail. Continuing with voice note number 3 on the legalities of flying drones plus first aiders as first responders discussion. As I said in the previous 2 voice notes, or at least in the introduction, I'm not going to provide an introduction as to who I am and all the rest of it on each of these, but people can rather watch the YouTube channel for additional information. Right, that being said, over and above of the certificates versus diplomas versus qualifications, another important phrase that needs to be taken into account is that of terminology. Okay, I think that terminology becomes very, very important because depending on the context within which we use specific phrases or words, we generate a perception within the listener, the community, the group members. And when we look at the term first aider, we need to be able to define what exactly is a first aider. And the best place to go and have a look at the definition of the word first aider is in the Health Act. So that is, to be specific, the National Health Act of 2003, which is Act 61 of 2003, taking into account that there may be some amendments. But for all intents and purposes, we're going to be working specifically with the National Health Act, and we're going to look at the definition of the word first aider. But at this point, I also want to include perhaps 2 or 3 other definitions as well in order to show context. So let's start with the definition in terms of the Health Act for first aider. A first aider means a person who is certified to level 3 through an accredited training provider registered with the Department of Labor and whose credentialed qualification is current. So that is the meaning of a first aider. I also want to move on and have a look at the definition here of paramedic in terms of the Act to show the comparison and the context within which we are looking at definitions. So a paramedic means a person registered as such with the Health Professional Council of South Africa. In terms of the Health Professions Act of 1974, which is Act number 56 of 1974. So you can actually see now there is a difference between paramedic and first aider, because a first aider has to be, a paramedic has to be registered as a paramedic with the Health Professional Council of South Africa. However, a first aider is only somebody who is certified to level 3. So in other words, 1, 2, and 3 through an accredited training provider registered with the Department of Labor. And both of those definitions play a critical role in terms of terminology. Because as I said, terminology is vitally important. Now, this is where there's a caveat, and I want to bring it to the group's attention in the next 5-minute segment, because there is a serious caveat that needs to be considered. Bearing in mind, we have a definition specifically for a first aider being certified to level 3 and a paramedic who is registered with the Health Professional Council as a paramedic in terms of the Health Professional Council. Sorry, listen to me now. I'm also going off on a tangent here. In terms of the Health Professions Act. So that is a difference. Let's bring in the caveat with regards to definitions in voice note number 4. Voice note number 4, the legalities of flying drones plus first aiders as first responders. I'm continuing where I left off with regards to the caveat regarding the definition called medical personnel, where under the definition, the phrase, the term first aider has been included. However, in terms of Section 4, subsection 12 of the National Health Act, which reads that the event medical provider, that's Section 4, subsection 12, must ensure that medical waste is disposed of by medical personnel in accordance with the existing legislation. And what is of particular interest of note within the National Health Act, and you can do it for yourself, just do a find for medical personnel on the actual document, which you can download from the government websites. Just Google it and you will come up with it. There are only 2 mentions throughout the entire Act with regards to medical personnel. One is the definition, and 2 is Section 4, subsection 12. Now, what this actually means is that first aiders who are present at an event. Now, remember, under Section 5, which section was it now? Let me just check which section that was. Sorry, Section 6, subsection 12, that said that you can utilize first aiders up to 75% of the required BAAs. So, for example, if you needed 100 BAAs at a particular event, you could have 75 first aiders up to level 3, and of course the other 25 would have to be BAA qualified and registered with the Health Professional Council. So basically what we are looking at here under Section 4, 12, is that at this particular event, even the first aiders are permitted to dispose of any medical waste, and that will include sharps as well. So any medical waste, first aiders may in actual fact provide assistance in that aspect. Overall, in terms of the there is a specific South African Events Management Act. I'm not too sure of its full title at the moment. I haven't got it up in front of me. The first aiders that do in actual fact attend an event as part and parcel of the 75% quota of the BAA, they are expected to require and required to provide a certain level of care, and they've got a certain duty of care up to their level of training, including that of providing CPR in terms of the first aid station or first aid stations that might be required at the event itself. So the caveat that I wanted to throw in is, because of the fact that we've got a definition in the National Healthcare Act that stipulates medical personnel includes first aiders, at face value, that does not mean that a first aider is a medical person. Take note of that. A first aider then cannot be considered a medical person. During the time of the event, Section 412 gives that first aider the right to assist in the disposal of medical waste, but it does not make him a medical person. In other words, we cannot have a situation where a first aider arrives at the scene of an accident, for argument's sake, standard motor vehicle accident, MVA, and claims to be a medical person. They are not in terms of the Act, and they therefore cannot even include themselves as a paramedic. Because remember, the definition of paramedic means a person registered as such with the Health Professional Council of South Africa, the HPCSA, in terms of the Health Professionals Act of 74, Act number 56 of 1974. And therefore, it becomes imperative that we understand terminology. And my appeal to all organizations, all bodies, all public bodies, private bodies, and all entities of whatever nature you might be, all businesses, all training service providers, and all first aiders, please take note that you cannot refer to yourself as medical personnel or paramedic. So let's go on with voice note number 6. Voice note number 6, as we continue with the legalities of flying drones, plus first aiders and first responders. I think I'm going to end it off probably in the next 2 voice notes on the discussion regarding first aiders. My appeal in closing on voice note number 5 was, please do not refer to yourselves as a paramedic or medical personnel, because you as a first aider, regardless of whether you're level 1, 2, or 3, you do not in actual fact qualify as a paramedic because you're not registered with the Health Professional Council of South Africa. We haven't even looked at the regulations as yet, and I'm not going to look at the regulations at this stage, not for this particular discussion. You also cannot consider yourself medical personnel, because the only time that medical personnel with first aiders is referenced is in where they can in actual fact dispose of medical waste at an event, and that's it. And this is why it becomes critical to understand terminology. You see, what happens is this: when a person appears at an incident, regardless of whether it is, it could be a home-based call of a medical nature, trauma nature, it doesn't make a difference. It could be an MVA, it could be DV, GBV, it could be anything. It doesn't make a difference. Any situation where the authorities are required to attend, and where the authority, or specific authority, is mandated by law to attend. If you as a first aider arrive at that scene and make claim to be paramedic, to be medical personnel, what you are doing is creating an impression within the local community and those people around you that you are somebody whom you are not. And it is on this basis that I want to bring this situation to where the risk lies. The minute a first aider does that, and the community members or members of a community are under the impression or belief that you are medical personnel or a paramedic, but you are a level 1, 2, and 3 first aider, they are going to expect a higher level of care, especially if it is their friend or their family member. And you as a level 3 first aider are not trained to provide that standard of care. If you think you are, it's time for a reality check. Because at the end of the day, you must remember that the first aid certification is actually a certification which is required to deal with and assist workplace injuries as required by the Occupational Health and Safety Act. That is the only place that a first aider may practice what they have learnt legally. It must also be noted that as a first aider, you are not required by law to treat any patient at all outside of the workplace. You need to understand that in terms of the workplace certification, that if your workplace has got any specific hazards that need to be dealt with, such as hazardous materials, you are further required to obtain the necessary training in order to be able to assist your colleagues at work. You are under no obligation to treat people on the side of the road. And I know many people are going to say, yes, but the Good Samaritan Act. Well, I've got one response to that. There is no such an act. That is somebody that is, to be quite honest, spreading delusional BS in order to elevate a position which they are not. I'm not saying anybody in particular, but the general concept is to elevate a position of a person to which they are not certified. I almost said qualified, but they are not qualified to, in actual fact, practice on the side of the road at all. Now, having been a first aid instructor myself, I'm fully aware of the fact that there are advantages to being certified, even at level 1 for that matter, and having completed CPR, that in the event you come across an incident or witness an incident, that you can, in actual fact, make a difference. In other words, you can get in there, you can do the splinting, you can pack the wound, you can stop the bleeding. If the patient is not breathing and has no pulse and all the rest of the good stuff that goes with a resus, then in terms of the training that you've received, and take note, in terms of the training that you have received on your level for CPR, then of course you can carry out CPR on that patient. And there, in all honesty, you do have an obligation that once you start, you do not stop until a paramedic or healthcare professional arrives on scene and takes over the responsibility of that patient. Because you are not responsible for that patient at all. You can assist, but you have to hand over to the qualified staff. Also, in terms of the National Health Act regulations, the duty to respond and treat all incidents lies with the provincial government. It does not lie with first aiders at all. This is why your emergency medical services, all of them, right across the country, ultimately, all have to be registered either with the Department of Health or the Health Professional Council of South Africa. Now, in the event anybody got the unedited voice note, I, in actual fact, mistakenly included HPCSA in the wrong areas. I got it back to front to a slight degree. So I think it needs to be clear that all of the practitioners are registered with the Health Professional Council of South Africa, which is fine. You'll find that 90% of them actually are. The other 10% are probably not practicing and therefore are not going to be registered. And I think that is an important aspect to consider, because if they are not registered, that means that legally they're not allowed to operate anywhere, whether it be in the road or in a clinical environment of any form or manner, ultimately. Now, because of the fact that first aiders are not registered with Health Professional Council of South Africa, again, the regulations don't allow them, and it is the regulations that actually do prevent it, or prevent them from operating on the road itself. When we have a look at the emergency vehicles that are being utilized for EMS, of course, EMS as a whole needs to be registered with the Department of Health, and they have to be registered as an emergency medical service or a volunteer emergency medical service. Both ways, those vehicles themselves need to be registered under the Department of Health. So that is where the separation comes between being registered with DOH as opposed to the practitioner, the physical person, being registered with Health Professional Council of South Africa. Looking at this aspect, in order to register with DOH, it'll have to be a legitimate business, whether that business is in the form of a PDY Limited or in the form of a non-profit company or non-profit organization. But there again, that is up to the department to decide what requirements need to be set on that level. When we look at that, first aiders are not going to be running businesses of this nature, and therefore one needs to consider the legalities of what the first aider is in actual fact doing when they themselves are running out of their own accord without supervision to things like motor vehicle accidents, etc. All right, so voice note number 7, I'm continuing with the legalities of flying drones plus first aiders and first responders. And I ended up on the last voice note by stating that I wanted to cover the aspect of volunteer organizations running first aiders for accidents and incidents. And I understand that I'm not going into much detail because I do want to keep this discussion a bit short or shorter than what we could in actual fact get involved in. So in essence, always remember that if you are a CPF or neighborhood watch of any sort or any other business, you are required to have first aiders available to treat your own members or your own staff members. Remember that as a neighborhood watch, your members, your registered signed up members, they in actual fact fall into a similar category as being a volunteer, not a volunteer, but a staff member of your organization. And in terms of Regulation 7, of course, you have to have X amount of first aiders for more than 10 staff members, and in other instances more than 100, etc., etc. And you have to have certain equipment and whatever else. So that being said, I encourage, not only I, but there are other acts that do encourage entities and organizations such as CPFs and block watchers, etc., to take members and put them through various levels of training. And we're going to cover that, I think, in the next voice note, and then call this series on first aiders as being complete. So get your members trained. Absolutely. They are going to be benefit to providing first response to any injuries that are suffered by your own members to start off with. However, that being said, you may not, according to any act, there's nothing that says that you are entitled to, in actual fact, dispatch your first aiders to go and assist at an incident. That's not the purpose of first aid. As I said previously, if you come across an accident, you can apply your skill set that you've learned at that particular level, i.e. splinting, fracturing, CPR. That's it. No more. But you're not entitled to get into a vehicle and race off at 150 and even put lights and sirens and that in your vehicle. That's illegal. That may not be done. Remember that your volunteer organizations that provide emergency medical services to the members of the general public, whether they be in home or on the side of the road, a motor vehicle accident, whatever the case might be, they have to be registered with the Department of Health. And as a CPF and a block watch or neighborhood watch, the chances of you getting registered with DOH is next to none. So don't even think about it. And I'm inclined to say that if you dispatch your first aiders out there into any incident, it doesn't make a difference what it is. It could be a mass casualty incident. It doesn't make a difference. You are doing so illegally, and you are not only endangering the other professional staff who arrive on scene, but you are endangering your own members who are, in actual fact, first aid members. Always remember that the minute that an organization dispatches or expects their membership or their staff to treat a patient on the side of the road, then you fall under the National Health Act and its regulations, and you in actual fact have to register with the Department of Health in order to provide such service, failing which you could, I think there are in actual fact offences that have been applied for doing so. So you could in actual fact be criminally charged as well. All right, so this applies now the same with events. I said I wanted to cover an event. You know, when organizers put together an event, it could be a massive concert or it could be a rugby game at Ellis Park. The organizers there have to, in actual fact, ensure certain requirements are met in terms of foods and waters and sanitation and first aid and everything else. And the way that one needs to look at an event is looking at it as a very big business. It's the same as walking into the corporate office, whether it's a banking institution or a manufacturing a factory, or even a workshop for maintaining and repairing cars. It's exactly the same thing, but just on a larger scale, and probably will only occur once or twice a year. All it is very large business, and therefore your first aiders are there to provide a first response to any medical situations while waiting for the professionals to arrive. So doing first response is not a first responder at all. You don't become a first responder because you're there first response. Think about it this way. At the scene of a motor vehicle accident, the first people to arrive on scene are normally members of the general public who have got absolutely no first aid training or medical training of any nature. And by medical, I mean paramedical all the way up through to medical, as in doctor or surgeon or professor or whatever. So do we consider Joe Bloggs, who's just crawled out of the local pub, hearing the Big Bang, do we consider him as a first responder? Ask yourself that question. Should he be considered a first responder? Because by the definition given by people, a first responder is somebody who arrives on scene first to help those that are injured. Well, that local drunk that just crawled out of the pub, he thinks he's there to help that community member that is now in trouble following a motor vehicle accident. Do we call him a first responder? Then the other argument is, yeah, but then it's got to be a person who is qualified. Good, I'm glad you said that. First aiders are not qualified. They are certified. Big difference. Sorry, people, first aiders are not at all to be considered as first responders. And again, as I said, the perception is created where the highest standard of care is in actual fact required. And why is this relevant to the legalities of flying drones? Because drone operators are doing the same thing by running accidents and incidents in order to go and assist in certain aspects of the overall. So I'm going to end off this part of the discussion on first aiders, and I'm going to post this out to the group, and then we're going to start putting together the legalities of flying drones, and I'll see if I can do that in probably 5 or maybe 10 more voice notes. At this point, please, if you've got any questions or comments, please feel free just to post them into the group. You can do it as a voice note. I'd like to include those voice notes in the final YouTube presentation so that those that are listening can, in actual fact, follow up on exactly what is going on with regards to any of the queries, etc., that are posted out. Okay, so we'll move on with voice note number 8 in due course. I was actually in voice note number 7 stating that I'd ended the discussion on the first aiders as first responders. However, there is just one other point I would like to continue with in voice note number 8 on the legalities of flying drones plus first aiders and first responders. And that is the discussion that has been raised, or some of the points that have been raised with regards to even the Disaster Management Act, advocating, for first aiders to be first responders, and that type of concept behind it, and also tying up with what I said previously, several organizations do in actual fact encourage this. Now, I think that one needs to be very careful in terms of the interpretation of what entities are doing. For example, it does make a difference what entity it is, whether it's a CPF, Neighborhood Watch, Blockwatch, or any other non-government organization, whether they're a non-profit company, a non-profit organization, public benefit organization, or just a CBO, or what's considered a CBO, community-based organization. Again, it's down to interpretation and it's down to terminology. And what I would like to stipulate is this, that the Disaster Management Act, and especially the National Disaster Management Framework, does in actual fact stipulate that municipalities and disaster management centers are obligated to in actual fact encourage community-based involvement in disaster management. Now, this is where we need to be clear, again, in terms of terminology. Who and what is disaster management? Right. Disaster management is an entity that is established by legislation, i.e. the Disaster Management Act. The amended is 16 of 2015, if I'm not mistaken. The Act itself makes provision for government to form and establish a National Disaster Management Center, and for provinces to create and establish a provincial disaster management centers, and for the municipalities to do it on a municipal level, whether they are a local, a district, or even a metropolitan municipality. And each one of those stipulations provides each level of government with what or the type of authority that they are entitled to carry out, and they have the overall and final and absolute and only responsibility for providing disaster management in South Africa. Now, I know for a fact that many organizations claim that they are doing disaster management. No, guys, you can't. Only disaster management, which is a constitutionally established entity, may provide disaster management. And this is where it becomes quite fascinating, because if you sit back and think about it, a disaster has got a very specific definition. I'll post the definition on the group after this voice note at some point in the conversation. But disaster management is a very specialized field. It has got nothing to do, listen carefully, it's got nothing to do with emergency medical services, emergency management services, fire brigade services, first aid, or anything along those lines. But its primary function is in actual fact to address and to work towards meeting at this moment in time the Send-Out Framework 2035 objective to reduce the risk of disasters occurring within the country. And in order to do that, disaster management works on what's called a disaster management cycle. And within that disaster management cycle, there are various aspects that need to be considered, which I think I will have to I will include in the next voice note, and provide a reasonably simple definition of where we're going with disaster management. Let's end this voice note number 8, and we'll continue in number 9 shortly. Right, continue in voice note number 9, the legalities of flying drones plus first aiders as first responders. I'm still addressing the final stages of considering first aiders as first responders before moving into the legality of flying drones. And in the last voice note, I actually raised the question as to who and what is responsible really for providing disaster management, and ultimately what is disaster management, and I'll explain why I've actually had to digress into this area. And I said that disaster management is a entity that is, it's an institution ultimately that is established by government in terms of the disaster management on all 3 levels of governance, being national, provincial, and on a municipal level. And that the primary focus today of disaster management, not only in South Africa, but worldwide, is in actual fact to look into disaster risk reduction, and therefore to move from a reactive response to a proactive response to dealing with disasters. Now, what that ultimately means is that instead of waiting for a disaster to happen and then you do something, you rather look at doing things before a disaster happens, and you do so with the intent to reduce the disaster. And this now then falls into what is called a disaster management cycle. So at some point within the cycle, there's actually 4 legs to the, or 4 divisions to the cycle itself, and that I'm just going to bring them up randomly. There's mitigation, preparedness, recovery, and response. Those are the 4 areas, just very briefly. So in essence, what you will find is at a point in time when a disaster occurs, you in actual fact respond to it. or the country, the community, whatever, will respond to that disaster and will provide whatever assistance is required. And then after the disaster has occurred and after the initial response, then there's a recovery a period that comes into existence. This is usually the time where you got cleanup operations that occur, and the rebuilding, etc., happens of that particular area that was damaged or affected by a disaster. And then the third segment of the cycle is mitigation. Now, mitigation is where you start looking at how do we in actual fact reduce a disaster? How do we in actual fact put things in place that will in actual fact reduce the risk of a disaster occurring? And then the final stage of the disaster management circle is preparedness. And in terms of preparedness, this is now where you have a look at your risk factors and say, okay, we've actually mitigated or put the following mitigation plans into place, but in the event that does fail, and for the areas where we haven't covered, considered, or even been made aware of, we now need to be able to prepare based on what has already occurred, either in our country or based on history across the world. And how do we, in actual fact, prevent damage to property? How do we prevent injury to humans? Or even death in that case. So that is the process of the disaster management cycle. And disaster management is the only legally legislated authority to provide disaster management. There is no other entity allowed to provide disaster management. Now, a lot of people are going to say, what in the world are you talking about? Well, that's exactly what we do. No, you don't. What you are in actual fact going to be doing is you're going to be contributing to either the response effort, the recovery effort, the mitigation effort, or the preparedness. And you are going to provide some kind of relief or response, but you are not going to be responsible for disaster management. You are working within the disaster management legislation. You are working within the disaster management cycle. And what you will be doing is very specific to your organization's sole and principal objectives. And I think to cover the sole and principal objectives, I need to move on to the next voice note, number 10. Okay, voice note number 10. What we've got is the legalities of flying drones plus first aiders as first responders. And I'm just quickly doing a very quick introduction to the disaster management cycle and what we in actual fact will be doing. And why is it important? Okay, so in the last voice note, I said that all bodies and entities will in actual fact be providing very specific roles or playing specific roles in terms of the disaster management cycle or in terms of assisting with the national government's disaster management structure because they are an institution. So let's give an example. I'll use our NGO as an example. We do not do disaster management because we are legally not disaster management. But we can contribute as a community-based organization or CBO or as a non-government organization to in actual fact assist in the mitigation of a disaster, i.e. by contributing to the Disaster Management Advisory Forum meetings. And even if we don't sit and attend those meetings, from a Disaster Management Act and National Disaster Management Framework perspective, there's nothing stopping us from doing documentation and submitting that to the national, provincial, or various municipal disaster management centers for consideration, especially when it comes to risk and looking at how to mitigate and reduce the risk of the various perils as defined by the Sendai framework on any particular area. We could concentrate specifically on, for example, earthquakes alone, or in some other instances, we could just say, okay, we will, as an NGO or as a CBO, we'll only concentrate on floods as another example. Now, when we start looking at all the other key role players that will participate in and contribute towards the DRR, or the disaster risk management aspect of disaster management. People like the municipal services, firstly fire, and then, of course, provincial services, AMBO, where we've got waterworks, we've got electricity, we've got sewage, we got all of the national government structures involved and entities involved in that entire process. But then we've also got to consider fire, volunteer fire services. We've got to consider private ambulance services, neighborhood watches, block watches, other community-based organizations, other NGOs, CPFs, etc., etc. And at the end of the day, each and every single one of these entities has got a very specific sole and principal objective. So a municipal water entity is not going to deal with electricity. And the electricity division is not going to deal with sewage. And the same thing applies when you start looking at your block watches, your neighborhood watches, your CPFs. It's not your responsibility to manage the disaster, but it is your responsibility to provide the services. In the case of, let's use CPF, for example. A disaster occurs. The question that needs to be asked, will SAPS be involved in all disasters? Initially, maybe, but not all. There could be some disasters that do occur where SAPS does not, in actual fact, get involved. Okay, so basically, I mean, if you take a look at things like earthquakes or floods or even hurricanes, SAPS initially will probably only play a secondary role. And I'm generalizing on SAPS now. Please understand that SAPS, water wing, for example, is a specialized skill that could be applied and made use of in times of an earthquake or a flood or a hurricane, etc., or even during a wildfire. So in terms of looking at a wildfire, 90% of the time, SAPS wouldn't be required. Unless, of course, now SAPS needs to come in and maybe, let's go back to the Katrina incident several years ago in the Gulf of Mexico, following the hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico, where the sheriff's department, they're not actually involved. They're on standby. But due to the looting that was taking place, then, of course, the sheriff's department was brought in. The same thing would apply with SAPS in times of a wildfire. Let's say, for example, the wildfires running through Knysna like it did in 2017, and then it approaches the suburban areas and people are evacuated out of the area. At this point, SAPS is still not required. To be quite honest with you, the private security service providers may very well be the better option, but they would still be under evacuation orders as well, or would be working within a very constrained sort of operation to protect the property that is left behind. But the minute that you do, in actual fact, have people moving into that area, either before the fire reaches the property or after it has moved on, then SAPS will get involved. So they play a secondary role. Therefore, CPFs that are attached to that particular precinct, you're not going to do disaster management. No matter what you think, you're not going to do disaster management. I know that several people have actually written to me and stipulated that, they're going to do this and they're going to do that and they're going to do the rest. And some of it was posted on the group here. And just to give an example, the setting up of a JOC. It's not up to the CPF or Block Watch or Neighborhood Watch or even a CBO to set up a JOC, because the JOC is actually set at the provincial, national, or municipal disaster management level. And that is important to know and understand, and I'll explain why in the next voice note. Okay, voice note number 11, we're carrying on with the legalities of flying drones plus first aiders as first responders. And I'm doing a very quick intro into the disaster management, the disaster risk management, and the disaster management cycle as a whole. And I've stated in the last message that the only entity that would legally set up a JOC would in actual fact be either the national, provincial, or municipal Disaster Management Center. And the reason for this is that because of the fact that disaster management takes over the legislative authority and responsibility for the particular disaster that is occurring, they therefore have the final say in terms of all forms of response and even recovery. And then, of course, they will follow up through the whole process of the rebuilding and the mitigation and the preparedness. But in essence, what usually happens is that the Disaster Management Center will then set up the JOC and will invite the key role players, such as fire, ambulance, private services, SAPS, SANDF if they are required, community-based organizations, and they will coordinate everything. Please bear that in mind, ladies and gentlemen. No other entity can actually set up that JOC in times of a disaster or large-scale event, mass casualty incident included, like a train crash or train accident. Okay? It is not an initial incident command may be established by the first persons who arrive on scene. And now I'm talking specifically from those in authority like SAPS or ambulance. But ultimately, when it comes to the safety of everybody, fire is responsible. And when fire arrives, they will take over on the IC side primarily, and then, of course, through the involvement and bringing disaster management, the minute disaster management attend, they then take over. They might utilize that incident command center that might have been set up at that time, but ultimately that is where the formation of the JOC sits and stands. So we need to understand that at the end of the day, we cannot call ourselves first responders if we are a first aider, but we also cannot claim to be doing disaster management when in actual fact we will only be providing certain services or providing certain skills within the response effort that has been carried out by disaster management within the overall disaster risk management and the disaster risk reduction after the recovery of the disaster occurring. So there's a lot of things that CPFs, block watches, neighborhood watches, CBOs, etc., can get involved with and get involved in and make contribution to the disaster management effort as a whole. But they are not, we are not. And I speak for ourselves as an NGO and a CBO as well. We are not disaster management, and we need to understand that. If you're a block watch, your sole and principal objective is to provide ABC as per your constitution, that your founding document that is used to establish your block watch. The same applies to that non-profit company or that non-profit organization or to that neighborhood watch. Whether the neighborhood watch, the block watch, is registered as an NPO, NPC, PBO, or just an ordinary association of persons, your founding document, in the case of an NPC, your founding document will be a memorandum of incorporation, not a memorandum of understanding. A MOU is something that legal entities will, in actual fact, sign with other legal entities and have an understanding where they are going to cooperate with each other and to what level and what's going to be supplied, etc., etc. CPFs, you are under the direct control of your station commander for your precinct. You also are established with a particular constitution as a founding document, and you've got a sole and principal objective. And I can tell you now, for those CPF entities that are going to turn around and say, no, Chad, you don't know what you're talking about. And to the other organizations who are quick to say, no, you don't know what you are talking about. Please, guys, go and read your constitution. And in more particular, if you're outside of Gauteng, I know that I've read the Gauteng Police Board's constitution, but I'm sure it follows the same lines as one that will exist for national and other provinces. There is absolutely no mention of disaster management within that constitution at all. And if I'm wrong, somebody please feel free to send it to me. Let me see it. Let me read it. And let me see in which context, at which point I'll withdraw the statement. But that's not your primary focus. Your name tells it all. Community Policing Forum. That is what you are there for. Are you in a position to add additional force multipliers to disaster management's overall efforts in the response effort? Absolutely, you can. So if you've got guys, especially out in rural areas, you might have people with fire trailers, etc., that type of thing. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Because you, as a CPF, can, in actual fact, but it's not your prime function. But if you have got it, I'm using this as an example, especially with what's happening in the Eastern Cape at the moment. I'm following those fires down that side of town with very, very close interest. And I noticed that, yes, ordinary citizens are putting together water trailers because water is a scarcity. And then those members end up joining the CPF. That doesn't mean that trailer now must sit because of the fact that, no, that CPF member can pick up the trailer and go out. The question is he doing it in the name, or is she doing it in the name of the CPF? Or should he or she not be doing it in their own personal capacity, but not as a CPF? You see, look at what's happening here. Perception, yet again. The minute that you got a CPF that is running out there with medical equipment and or water or fire equipment, or carrying out search and rescue operations, you are confusing the community as to your role, because now that certain members of that community leave your community and move into another community, and then the CPF in the other community isn't doing what you have been doing in the community where the guy left, and now he's expecting the same thing of a community policing forum in a different precinct, maybe in a different province, and then he's bad-mouthing that CPF because of the fact they're not doing what you were doing, which you were doing outside of your mandated obligations. You see the danger that is created when we skew terminology, when we skew purpose. It is not in the best interest of our community. Our community being South Africa, when you see an ambulance, they must know it is there to provide medical assistance. And that is why medical personnel in times of ordinary day-to-day emergencies should never carry firearms. Because if they did, those ambulances would become or be considered a threat to the community. Voice note number 12, and I'm really going to close up on the first aiders and first responders and the last of the disaster management. This is why medical personnel shouldn't carry firearms, because you will be perceived as a threat. And the next ambulance that comes in to assist in that area, the community could end up attacking you. And again, I know there's somebody out there. There are a couple of people out there that are going to say, BS, Chad doesn't know what he's talking about. Well, I want to tell you, I actually do. Because of the fact that I know in the 80s, that's exactly what happened in South Africa. And TPA in particular, the whole of the TPA ambulance network was being attacked and brought under threat because of the fact that it was government, not because they carried firearms. It was government. Also, in terms of the Geneva Conventions, you're not allowed to carry certain firearms, like automatic rifles and that kind of thing. Medical personnel, those that are wearing the Red Cross as an indicative and as a protective emblem, have the legal right in terms of the Geneva Conventions to carry sidearms. And that the purpose of that is to protect their patient. Now, take particular note of this. The Geneva Conventions permit the carrying of personal sidearms to protect their patient, not themselves. So in times of war, if the man's going to shoot you as a medic, well, for all intents and purposes, you can't shoot back. But if he's going to shoot your patient, you can shoot back. And there's a lot of discussion about, okay, but if he shoots you, then there's nobody to treat the patient, and the patient will be killed. So that's a secondary basis where you're entitled to that self-defense in order to protect your patient. So perception is crucial to understanding what we are doing. If we put first aiders out there as first responders, our communities are going to expect a much higher level of care from a first aider who is not capable of providing that level of care. And you in a private service or you in a government service, by advocating that these people are in actual fact first responders, you are in actual fact minimizing your own position and role, and you are jeopardizing your position and role. Because when you do arrive on scene, you could arrive at the scene of any incident, especially one of civil unrest, and even especially during times of civil war, but definitely in times of war, period. What will in actual fact happen is the community is going to be so annoyed that that first aider wasn't able to provide a level of care because the first aider said or gave the impression, he doesn't have to say it, but gave the impression that he is in actual fact qualified to do it, and then you arrive on scene and they attack you. In addition to that, by allowing first aiders to be of the opinion that they are at the level of a first responder, on the medical side in particular, many of these first aiders are under the impression they can run around with red lights and blue lights and sirens and exceed speed limits and chase people away from scenes and do declarations or even if they don't have the paperwork to do a DOD to the full extent of the letter, but they could in actual fact through the social media and everything else declare a patient P4 and stand services down. In the meantime, the patient is not P4. So that there is a very, very, very big danger that we are creating by allowing first aiders to think that they are first responders. They are not. They are either a member of a CPF, and that's it, or a member of a block watch or neighborhood watch or whatever other organization, volunteer, CBO, whatever. That's it. They are not first responders. Guys, we need to ensure that our communities fully understand and know who a first responder is. We need our communities to know and understand the chain of command, especially when it comes to incident command structures within each of the services. Our communities need to fully understand this for your protection. Not only for theirs, but for your protection first and foremost. And first aiders, you need to understand you may only work within the workplace. You are not allowed to work on the road. There is absolutely nothing more that could or should be said about this. In the same manner that all organizations need to know and understand, you cannot do disaster management. It's just not possible. The only time a person can do disaster management is if they are with government. And that now brings us to the point of the legalities of flying drones, which we will continue with in the next voice note. This is seriously the end of the first aiders as first responders.